Reverend William Barber is President Senior Lecturer of Repairers of the Breach, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. He's a bishop with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. He's on many boards. He is now here at Yale, a professor of practice, of public theology and public policy, and the director of the new Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at Yale Divinity School. Many books I could name, and I'm actually going to pass on that. He's written many books, many of them with Jonathan. And you're going to hear about one of those books, and then you're going to buy it. But I do want to introduce Reverend Barber's co-author and collaborator for many years, 25 years, I think is what I was just told. Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove, who is the assistant director of the Center for Theology and Public Policy at the Divinity School. He lives most of the time in Durham, North Carolina. He's both North Carolinians. And we're delighted to have you in the neighborhood now. And this is our first collaboration, Gilder Lehrman Center, and the new Theology and Policy Center at Divinity School, and hardly the last.
That's right.
We're going to plan a whole conference.
That's right. Together.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Last time we were together, you said, let's do a conference on history and theology.
That's right. That's right.
So we'll start today.
That's right. And we got to get around to the third Reconstruct. Because you taught us on the first two. We got to say, well, we need to do the third. That's right. That's what I'm going to be working on.
I stick to the first one.
That's right. First one. Yeah. That's right.
Third Reconstruction is titled another of Reverend Barber's books. I want to dive right into this new book, White Poverty. But first, the book is, to a great extent, about what you call your own biblical imagination. Now, the prophet Jeremiah, who's one of your favorites, he seems to be in there with Isaiah and Amos and Ezekiel and a couple others. Jeremiah, we're told, hated his prophetic mission. Tried to hide in the wilderness if he could. He hated that role of having to constantly be, the voice of wrath and castigation. But God wouldn't let it. You ever feel like Jeremiah?
One of the great texts, first of all, even one of the great texts in Jeremiah is when Jeremiah says, "Oh, that my head was a fountain of tears, that I might cry on behalf of the nation." Jeremiah talked about being in a place where everybody's lying. The princes are lying, the preachers are lying, and they're all lying about the poor and the least to be. Jeremiah was young when he was called, and he first said to God, "I'm too young." And then God gave him this mission, because see, in theology, prophets only arise when the religious cultus has lost its way and has gotten off center in his concern and his care and his push for the poor and the least of these in policy. And when the nation's policies have gotten off and the church or the religious culture is going along with it or being quiet, then prophets arise. And they come out of many times that structure, as did Jeremiah.
And they don't go around and volunteer.
Oh, heck no. There's a great resistance to it. And because it normally gets you killed. I mean, none of the prophets, made it for so long. It's dangerous God, because you make everybody mad to some degree. And particularly when you make the people mad who, as one line said, you comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. But the ones that get mad that say, you shouldn't be doing this. If you come over here, you can get paid. You know, just be quiet. So Jeremiah gets slapped in the church, in the temple, for declaring that the nation is going to fall because of the way it's treating the poor and the least of these. And the king had his own false prophet who said, no, it's not, he's just lying. And so Jeremiah gets slapped, he gets thrown in the outhouse up to his neck in mire, if you know about southern outhouses. And he says to God, you lied to me. And the lie he says, God, you told me if I went out here and did these things, that change would come. And God said, no, I didn't. I told you to go out here and do it. I never said that they were going to listen per se. I said, you go and you tear down, you uproot. And Jeremiah said, so I'm not going to say anything else in your name. And he said then, though, that God's word was like a fire shut up in his bones. And it burned him so much that he could not be quiet because of what was happening to the least of these and how it was damaging the country and the world itself. So the answer is yes. There are days that I say, God, you know, this is funny. If you call somebody to lead marches, they can't walk. You know, there are days when you get threats. I don't talk about them, you know. But I remember the day after we challenged the General Assembly on the health care and on getting more money for children in our preschool. The next morning, we had a very clear death threat sent to the office I was at that said, you're in the death pool now, and you won't make it to Christmas. I never talk about stuff, you know, in the media. It's just part of reality. I remember when we were fighting for health care, and the guy said, you know, I hope you just die, and your heart just burst up. And I said, but and he was on a walker and in a ruler. And I said, but it looks like you need help care. He said, we deserve it. We deserve it, but you all don't, because the way they had framed Medicare expansion in North Carolina was that it was for mainly lazy folk, and that did not get qualified as black folk and brown folk. You get frustrated, Dave, at the structures, you know, particularly when the people that you know better, you know, this past administration, when we begged and begged and begged, you know, bring a group of poor and low-wage people from across the country, economists, lawyers, and clergy to the White House, and let's face this issue of 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country. And, you know, that meeting never occurred. We got offered personal, like me, just with me, and I wouldn't accept them because it wasn't about me in particular. It was about, I want the people who've been impacted to speak. And then you get told you're not playing the game right, you're not doing, or then you come to an election and you were screaming. Don't forget the 40% of the electorate, which is poor, low-wage folk. If you focus on them, they can transform the electorate, and then focus everywhere else. And then after it's over and folks lose, they say we should have focused on working different poor people and low-wage folks. So yeah, there are days that you get tired, weary, and then lastly, David, when you can do something else. You know, you struggle sometimes with that reality, the tiredness, but there's a fire. And if you move it to the New Testament, for me as a Christian, something lives with me, and something my professor said. He said, about the Spirit, he says, you can call your encounter with the divine your faith moment, your aha moment, your whatever you want to call it. But, and you can explain it any kind of way. I was baptized, I was sprinkled, I prayed, I saw a dream, however you want to. But if afterwards it does not produce a quarrel with the world's injustices, then your claim to the religious faith of the scriptures is terribly suspect. Terribly suspect.
Thank you. Jeremiah was one of Frederick Douglass's two favorite prophets, I think.
Yeah.
He and Isaiah.
And he was a crybaby. But even more so, in ancient Israel, there was a group of people called the wailing women. And when they would all cry, it would get God's attention. Jeremiah, we believe his mother was one of those wailing women. So he didn't just cry, he wailed. There's a difference in just crying and wailing and weeping, and he wept over the state, the unnecessary damage that was being done. And he often would say, how to ancient Israel, how do you do this when you were slaves in Egypt? And now that you have a country, you want to turn around and treat your own people within your border worse than you would treat. And he would wail, but crying in that sense is actually a form of prophetic speech. I mean, I even think now, imagine if right now in the midst of this thing, if 1 million women, I'm just saying, well, I don't mean only y'all, but I'm just for the purpose of Jeremiah, would go or have me or have it and fill up every hall in Congress, in the Senate office, and just cry and wail and scream and take shifts.
And no shift over to the Supreme Court.
Right. And just cry and then get up there and poke you on the rest you crying. And I mean serious wailing and crying. It would dramatize. We may have to go to something like that. It would dramatize in a powerful, nonviolent way how bad this is. When we heard Bishop Buddy say, "You have to have mercy." What is folks doing? But it's have mercy on the poor and the immigrant. But what if that turned into a wailing of great proportion, like the wailing women of Jeremiah's time? We're going to have to engage in some of this kind of moral imaginative activism in the days to come.
So I want to have to ask, what should we be doing in our division? Let's talk about the book, White Poverty. How exposing myths about race and class can reconstruct American democracy. In my reading, you correct me, both of you. It's one part manifesto about the place of poverty in this society, about the meaning of poor people. And no one wants to be called poor people, even when they're poor. It's one part memoir. At times, I feel like I'm reading a memoir. It's clearly an act of testifying. It's a strategic playbook, it seems to me, for a movement. And then it's frankly your use of the prophets to do prophecy. So it's many things at once. This isn't just a book. It's not a social scientific book about poverty. Although there's a lot of social scientific data in here, and when I'm reading this, I'm wondering which of you is digging all that out. You know, you get a lot of help. Okay, good. Your data team. You keep talking about your data team. That's interesting. I wish I had a data team. Anyway, and at the end of the day, it's a book rooted in your own biblical imagination. But the subject is something we do not talk about much. In fact, one of your chapters is entitled, "We Can't See It." We don't see it. Poverty itself, but especially white poverty. So, how and why did you choose to write a book on white poverty? Is it because of the last, 13 to 15 years of this Porter's campaign, this movement, that finally you decided to write up all these stories? And I want to come back to a few of these stories, the incredible people that you found. But why a book on white poverty?
Let me hit on a few things that you said. Prophet and prophetic speech has to be deeply analytical.
Uh-huh.
Prophets were some of the most brilliant people of their time. If you look at prophet, even Jesus' first sermon is a policy plan. He says, if you're going to believe in me, and if you're going to claim to follow my spirit, then here's what you must do. He doesn't say you got to go pray in a building. He doesn't say you have to pray. He said you got to declare good news to the poor. And the word used for poor that's translated out of the ancient language is protokos, which is a specific word. It means those who've been made poor by economic exploitation. So what Jesus does, he lists a category of people who are on the margins and says that any time you talk about gospel, if it doesn't deal with these people, if it doesn't challenge the systems hurting these people, it's not gospel. It's something, but it's not the gospel of Jesus Christ. So the prophet and even Jesus were very, you can't do public theology and not do public policy. The gospel itself is a public policy. And you can't do public policy if you be loud and wrong. I mean, you just can't. And so
You're both in the title of your center.
Right. So we walk hand in hand with the God. In fact, if you know the history, economics was once taught under the realm of moral philosophy. It wasn't a standalone in the academy. You know, I often say, but the reason some people wanted it out of moral philosophy is because you can't have an economic system that runs on slavery and then talk about economics as moral philosophy. You got to somehow take away the moral consideration and just make it all about the numbers so that the end, making money, justifies the means. So also, you got to tell stories. You got to put faces on this. That's part of what this book is, putting a face on poverty. And so, yes, it is part storytelling. Why white poverty? John and I talked a lot about this, and we write the book in community. Both of us come from different places, and yet we forged this moral partnership. That's part of the way we do analysis. We say you have to do what's called moral analysis. Moral analysis, moral articulation, which means you get language that gives you a stronger way to talk, a bigger way than just left versus right and Democrat versus Republican. Though that language in itself is divisive, it puts us in boxes. But moral language is expansive, right? When we talk about what's right, what's wrong, what's just and what's unjust. So moral analysis, moral articulation, moral agenda, and then moral action. And the way we break it out is you take your Constitution or your Declaration of Independence, and the Bible and Scripture, and you lay it like a grid on top of a piece of public policy and ask, does this piece of public policy establish justice? Because that's a promise of God too. Does it promote the general welfare? Does it provide for the common defense? Does it meet the demands of love? And then if it doesn't, then based on the foundational principles of faith and democracy, it's flawed and ought to be challenged. So the book is trying to point in that direction that's the conversation we need to have in this country about public policy, which then allows us to do what Dr. King said, damn the policies, but not destroy people. In other words, that we have to be able to go hard at the policy without becoming inhumane in our attempt to be human, right? But why white poverty? When we started the Poor People's Campaign, which we were in the Moral Monday movement, and I won't go into articulate. We started in 2013 in North Carolina. The most massive, expansive, diverse coalition of people standing against injustice in the South since Selma. In fact, one of the gatherings was over 80,000 people, but more importantly, it was gatherings at the State House legislature every week. Around not just black folks. The blacks was primarily white. It was 65% white. It was Democrat, Republican, and it was around voting rights and health care and minimum wage and education and even attack on the LGBT community. But we decided that we would join in and form the Poor People's people's campaign, a national call for moral life. And the requirement of nonviolent engagement and the requirement even of prophetic articulation is that you first have to do your analysis. So the first thing we did was we got a group that could do the analysis. And we said, this is what we want you to do. We want you to look at poverty, racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economies, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism, and tell us what the state of being is. What is the state of reality? And this was in 2018, so we wanted a 50-year now. Like, where was it in 68? When the welfare rights women called for not Dr. King first, the welfare rights women called for it. What's the state of poverty today? So they did the analysis. We got the best economists we could find, historians were part of it, sociologists, and we,
A bunch of historians.
That's right, and we called it the souls of poor folk, playing off of W.B. Du Bois, the souls of black folk. And when it came back, we said, whoa. Because if you had listened to any conversation at that time about poverty in America, turn this mic up a little bit so I can hear myself, they would say, well, there are only 30-some million poor and low-wage people in this country. But our economists came back and said, but that's using a flawed methodology. And it's using a methodology that deliberately undercounts poverty.
That's a federal.
That federal made. But it was flawed when it was put in place in 1960. And not only that, the way it's done, it isolates black people and brown people. But if you use the supplemental measurement of poverty, and you talk about poverty and low wealth, see, because at that time the government was saying, if you make $13,000 a year, you're not poor. You're in the lower middle class. No, really. We've had Congress people say that. Why are y'all fussing about the minimum wage being only $7.25? Well, if you make $7.25, you make about $14,000, $15,000 a year. That's not poor. And so we said we got to go at the whole narrative, the whole way poverty even discussed. So when they came back with numbers, David, these were the numbers, and they still are today for the most part. 43% of the country is poor and or low wealth. 51% of our children are poor and low wealth. That's 140 million people.
And the majority are working. They're working.
Working, and the greatest number of white women. Many of them are working poor, because when we say poor and low wealth, we're talking about people who work every day for less than $15 an hour. By the way, the March on Washington agenda called for the minimum wage to be raised by 75 cents and indexed with inflation. And if that had happened, and they wanted that a part of the 64 Civil Rights Bill, if it had happened, then the minimum wage today would be around $18 an hour. 3 Nobel Peace Prize economists a few years ago won the Nobel Peace for examining whether or not living wage would hurt jobs and price, and they proved that it wouldn't. But here we are, our government telling us 30 million, and they are 110 million short of who's actually. Then we said, okay, well, how many people are without health insurance or underinsured? 87 million. Then we said, well, wait a minute, go back and break this poverty number down. They said, how? We said race, and they said, well, you don't want to do that. And I said, why not? They said, because it's going to show that there are more white people that are poor, low wealth than black, and black people don't get mad. I said, why? Because it'd be like you taking, I said, no. We need to tell the truth. The time of this to have a truthful conversation. Just like when
They didn't know where you were from.
Well, just like when people say, why do you name the poor people campaign? Because poor folks said name it that. They said we're not happy that we're poor, but the truth needs to be told. When we talk about poverty, we talk about sometimes people who work in manufacturing jobs and sleep in their car all night. We talk about teachers who can hardly make it, and then in some state what they do is they pit the teachers against the welfare recipients and or people that are receiving certain money in order to get raises. I mean, all kinds of ways we play with the poor. So they did it. When they came back, David, quickly, the number says 60% of Black people are poor and or low wealth. And by the way, even with that, poverty among Black people is not on the major agenda, was not on any civil rights organization. Even though 60% of Black people are poor and low wealth, 26 million people. But then we pull the number for white. 30% of white people are poor and low wealth. 66 million people.
Don't worry about taking notes. It's all in the book.
So 40 million more. And yet, when we talk about poverty, it often was politicians quickly make it a Black issue.
Yeah.
They quickly make it a Black issue, a brown issue. When Reagan did it, he talked about any big, strong bucks that were buying porterhouse steak. It's always quickly, when we talk about poverty, for the white Black woman on welfare, as though the welfare money is breaking the country, when in fact it's all the wars that we fought and the debt that came out of that, and because the unnecessary wars that we fought. So we said, we got to talk about this, and we can't leave. If we're going to get in a moral movement, we can't dismiss 66 million people. So we started going to Appalachia and places and bringing them in conversation with Black people. And then we did something else. We also looked at why poor and low wage folk, why there was 30 million infrequent voters. 57 million vote, 30. And we found the number one answer was nobody talks to us. We looked at all of the campaign debates, not 10 minutes on poverty, even if you got 140 million Americans living in poverty or wealth. And we started, we said, this is invisibility, this is design. Somebody has a reason to marginalize this. And the more we investigated, it was almost as though there were those who wanted to make poverty a Black problem, and only Black folk and brown folk wanted change, which is actually not the truth. And so that's the way in which the political system, Democrats and Republicans, get around dealing with the issue of poverty. And then what happens lastly is they say trickle down economics will fix it, or neoliberalism just fixing the middle class. And we're not even going to say, you can't get. I was so proud of the day when Bernie found, we had this ongoing thing, and he finally said poverty. I'm telling you, you can't get some of you guys even to just say poverty. It's almost as though they're scared if they say it, they're going to be branded a socialist or something. And our argument in the book is, when you don't say poverty and no wealth, you are leaving 140 million people out of our political conversation. And if you're left out, you're left out.
You have a wonderful quote from Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
You had all the candidates down for a candidate forum at your own church.
Yeah. You want me to tell that quote?
Tell it.
Pete was running for
this was in the
president. Yeah. He was still in the race. Yeah. And we had several candidates come. And I asked him on stage, why is it? If you can't debate these numbers, economists from Columbia, Harvard, Yale, whoever, you can't debate these numbers. Why is it that politicians won't? And he said, basically, I can't remember the exact quote, but he said, we are told not to by the consultants.
Don't use the word poor.
So do not use that word poor. And even though, here's the other reality, poor people and low-wage people now make up 40% of the electorate, 30% of the electorate. And in battleground states, they make up nearly 43% of the electorate. There's not a battleground state. In fact, we don't even know what's really a battleground state, because 40% of the electorate doesn't even vote. And then you got 30 million poor low-wage folk that says nobody talks to us, and they are infrequent voters. But in most of the so-called battleground states, less than 12% of poor low-wage voters that have not voted, organized around an agenda, and they vote for themselves, would change every at-large election in this country.
You've already named one of the four big myths around which you framed this whole book. But
Hey, Bob,
go ahead.
you can borrow your own book, borrow my book. That's right. Oh, wow, you did read it, didn't
I always make my books look like a right. Myth number one is
Yeah. So we talk about
whiteness is the shared interest.
Yes, we start with the answer, which is interesting about this book.
Yeah.
We don't let you read. We start with moral fusion. And moral fusion, if I could real quickly, comes out of the first Reconstruction somewhat.
Yeah.
When in the South, fusion politics, black and white, many of them poor white, and former slaves and freedmen, in many southern places, were able to come together and form political alliances.
Right.
That fundamentally shifted the state legislatures. And many of them, once they got in office, in fact, they came from North Carolina when fusion politics took over. They rewrote the Constitution, and in our state, they changed the preamble to the Constitution to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all persons are created equal, endowed by the creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruit of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. And then in Article 11, Section 4, they said beneficent provision to the poor, the orphan, and the unfortunate is the first duty of a civilized state.
Wow.
This is the Reconstruction
This is Constitution.
Constitution of North Carolina in
1870, something right? Well, 1868, 69.
Okay.
And they made public education a constitutional right. We don't even have that in the federal. Right now. So my point is, all over the South, these black-white fusion coalitions, when the movie that came out, Free State Jones, that stuff really happened.
Oh, yeah.
Poor whites and poor figured out that they had all been used by the slave masters and the plantation owners who made all kinds of rules to keep their sons out of the war. And we said, when we in North Carolina, we use that model. We said, today you could get black and white and brown and Asian to form a coalition around issues and using particularly poverty and low wages as one of those issues. Now, this does not mean that you don't deal with race, because that's impossible. It means you deepen the conversation about race. So what we were able to show, we go places like up in Appalachia to show the people that come up here and tell you to vote for them because they're against gay people, they're against voter fraud, which there is none primarily. Look at their records on how they actually vote. They may tell you that, but when they go to the state, they actually vote against labor rights. And guess what? That allows these companies, these coal miners up here, the coal companies, to take your labor rights. They vote against health care. But they tell you that health care is primarily for these poor, lazy folk. But did you know there are 10,000 people in your county, that's 99% white, that would benefit from that people stuff?
Yes.
Wait a minute. So one of so that's what the myths that come out of here, listen to them, is one is that pale skin is a shared interest. Pale skin, that white people are locked in, black people are locked in. That only black folks won't change in America. That's a myth. That poverty is only a black issue. That's a myth. And that we can't overcome division. We can't overcome division. We challenge all of that in the book, not just with words, but with actual stories and an actual movement. We can't overcome these divisions. These divisions don't have to happen, but we have so many players that are involved in not helping change this reality, even the corporate media. You have to fight so hard to get even the corporate media to do a story. Let me give you a story. All of y'all turn into a reporter. 800 people died today. 800 people died today. And we know the cause. And it's an epidemic proportion. You think that ought to be news of that? 800 people died today. And we have found out that if this epidemic stays in place, 800 people are going to die tomorrow, 800 people are going to die the next day, and we are possibly going to lose 250,000 people in this country in 1 year. And we know how to stop it, but the cure is being blocked. You think that's news? You ever heard that story? That's actually going on right now.
Fourth leading cause of death.
Poverty and low wages is the fourth leading cause of death in America. Higher than respiratory disease and many others. It's at epidemic level. When we got to 500 people dying a day from COVID, we said we had an epidemic. 800 people will die, but so many of them die invisible. There's no reporting on it. There's no talk about it. Another headline, real quick. Nurse reports that farmers in Midwest are committing suicide because they are so poor that the only way they can get money for their family is to fake their death. They commit suicide but make it look like an accidental death so that their family can claim insurance. You think that would be news to the left? That's actually happening. We're in the midst of COVID, and it has been found that in whether a county is majority black or majority white, if you're poor, low wage, you die at a rate 5 times higher than other people. 68% of all the money set aside for COVID has gone to corporations and not to the people. The people who are called essential workers, our investigative reporter has just found out that a large number of them are poor and low wages. They are called essential workers, but they are treated like they're expendable because they go to work and they're not given health care, a living wage, paid family leave. You know, that's ought to be headline. What if that was discussed in our political? It's this invisibleness. So we named it white poverty to drive this home, not to talk against black poverty, but to say we better have a real dealing with the fullness of poverty in this country and break away from these myths, because sometimes myths help you, like when somebody says close the door because you close the door, the boogeyman won't get you while you sleep at night. But myths also make you have false fears. And myths can keep you locked up and it disables your ability to be free and to live free.
And many of the people you met during this decade and more of Poor People's Campaign in North Carolina, in Kentucky, in Ohio, out west, Binghamton, New York, on and on and on. The book is full of places and people, and the narrative kind of hangs on them.
Yeah. By design, we wanted to put,
Yes.
We said that years ago I studied a sociologist, I forget his name, who said the great problem many times of folk progressives is they're great at the numbers of bad on the faces.
Is that a way of saying sometimes we don't write well?
Well, I see what we don't do well. You remember when this whole struggle with the marriage amendment came out, and the first thing extremists did, who called themselves Republicans, is they found some clerk somewhere that didn't want to do it, and they made her a poster child. And so folks said, that looked like my aunt. That's what they were saying. But oftentimes, other folk, they'll talk to numbers, but they won't put faces on it. You know, I've often said, why is it that progressives, or whoever, wouldn't call 3 or 4 or 5 poor low-wage folk from their district to the Capitol and have every media every camera there and let America see what we're talking about. This book is trying to turn your eyes into like a telescope, so that you don't just hear the number, that you actually see. So can I give a couple?
Of course, I was gonna name some names for sure.
We'll go ahead and name.
No, you.
Okay. So let's take, and Jonathan does now, we'll be going among my people, you know, but let's take, Lincoln.
Corbin, Kentucky.
Corbin, Kentucky. So we're in Kentucky, and Liz Steele Harris is there at the Cairo Center, and we're doing a tour by the Kentucky Poor People's Campaign. We have 41 campaigns down, 41 states. And 41 coordinators. And we're there on the same day, David, when historically, 100 years ago, all the black folk were told you better be out of town by sundown. They falsely accused a black man of rape during Red Summer. And Red Summer, those who don't know, is when the president, even Woodrow Wilson, allowed people to kill black soldiers returning from the World War I. And James Weldon Johnson called it Red Summer because of the blood that flowed in the street. It was a way of putting people back in their place, if you will, coming back from the war. And we're sitting in this church, and this community is remembering and repenting of that day 100 years ago. Maybe it was 2019, I think. I'm not sure. And this young lady named Lincoln stands up. She says, Bishop Barber, Reverend Barber at the time, says, how do you love somebody of your family deeply, but they are your worst enemy? And I said, open that up. And the story is told in the book. And she began to say, I'm queer. I'm poor. And I love black people. And my parents don't like queer people. Our church doesn't like queer people. And they blame poverty on, other people. And I love my mom and dad. I love how they pray, but I have to challenge them because they've been taught, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, so they basically been taught that black and brown people are our quote unquote enemies, rather than we should be allies because of what we suffer. And then Lincoln said, I thought I given up the faith. I thought I was not a believer anymore. But I came to find out it wasn't that I'm not a believer, it's I was taught to believe in the wrong God. And that's what she said. And then she said, this movement has given me my faith back and a family. A place from which I can love but challenge my biological family. But I have a family. And I'm in this movement to make poverty sing. And then she asked me, said, can I come up and give you a hug? And it was one of the most powerful moments. Then there's Pam, in Belhaven. Right? Down in Belhaven, if I stand up on my knee and say, down in Belhaven, North Carolina, there was a white Republican mayor. And he actually supported Trump. And then North Carolina decided in 17 minutes, and they wouldn't even let doctors testify when extremists took over our legislature in 2012, 13, that they were going to deny Medicaid expansion. Well, the response to that is what do you call it? When the collateral damage is that all these rural hospitals start closing because they can't stay open. And so a conglomerate that ran the hospital in Belhaven decided they're going to close it, which means these people now will be 100 miles away from the hospital. And the hospital was actually started because of civil rights action back in the 1940s and 50s, federal government opening up money. But the money said, if you get the hospital, you got to serve black people.
Back under Truman.
Under Truman, that's right.
1946. I didn't know this until your book.
Yeah,
1946.
1946.
There's a law passed to create rural hospitals.
Yeah, but it said you have to serve all people, which allows for free health care. Anyway, so this white mayor calls me and says, I'm a Republican, I voted for Trump, I know you're not gonna come down, but I gotta save this hospital because it's gonna hurt white people, black people, everybody. I said, we'll be down there. He said, what? And we went down, long story short, he got involved, and he walked from Belhaven to DC to traumatize what was happening. But there was a lady, the first casualty of the hospital was a lady named Pam.
Yes.
Gibbs, Portia Gibbs, she's not Portia, not Pam, right? Portia. And Portia had a heart attack. And there's something I didn't know this called the golden hour, the golden 60 minutes, if you can get people to the hospital. They had shut the hospital down. She was 5 minutes from the hospital. They told her to wait in a high school parking lot for the helicopter. And she dies waiting on the helicopter. And when we hold a march in that city, her husband asked me would I ride on the back of the truck with him doing I think it was a July 4th celebration. And when I walked to the back of the truck, it's got a Confederate flag on the bumper. But my moral said get on the truck. Not because I endorsed the flag almost became insignificant because it was bound to bump. But it was his humanity and her humanity. And that had a powerful effect upon that man. And I said, I can't turn away from him just because he's white or just because he voted differently, because the fact of the matter is this policy. And we tried to tell some Democrats to go down there and talk. In fact, the sitting senator, we said, go down there and talk to these folks. And the response at that time by the senator was, well, they shouldn't have voted that way.
That's
Are you crazy? Go down there and talk to the people, because when you got elected, you're supposed to represent everybody. But those are the kinds of people and stories. I could talk to you about our sister in West Virginia, Pam. That's Pam, right? Pam Garrison in West Virginia.
Terry in Cleveland.
Huh?
And Terry in Cleveland, she was amazing.
That's right. And the more I think about Pam, we think our grandfathers were a part of the Blair Mountain War in West Virginia, when the government and the coal mine bosses hired biplanes to drop Molotov cocktails on top of black and white protesters fighting for more money for coal mines. My grandfather was in Bluefield. But Pam in West Virginia has introduced us to people in the hollows of the mountains. I met a group of ladies up there who every Tuesday they sell tacos, all white, to passersby. And I asked them why. They said, well, this is the way we create a community fund so that when one of us has our menstrual cycle, we have enough money to buy what we need. These are women that we met with Senator Manchin. And he refused. He told them a lie when he was running. Said he would support raising the minimum wage that hadn't been raised since 2009. Think about that. $7.25 had been raised since 2009. But when we got him on the phone, and he kept talking. One of them said, "Look, Joey, I know your mama. And my people supported your daddy's store. That's the only way y'all survived." And one day, he got extraordinarily mad because we had a march and all these folk, like 98% white, were standing out in front of his office, challenging him on voting rights. Not on living wage, but this time they were on voting rights because they passed voter suppression bills in West Virginia. And what people found out is they weren't passing voter suppression bills in West Virginia to affect black people, because no black people up there. The voter suppression they were passing up there was to affect many of these mountain people who have progressive ideas, because mountain populism and civil rights activism have kindred spirits. They have a history, right? And I can go on with other stories.
Yeah, well, I think I'm getting a signal that there's a reception waiting.
I talk too much.
But I want to add too that there's so much in this book. There's also humor. This the story that you can tell in utterly bleak ways, but there's a great sense of humor in this book. I love the moment when I figured that your Uncle Richard somebody was angry at your aunt. I forget.
Come on.
Okay.
Yeah, but are you talking about this, isn't that the story about the night they burned this?
No. I'm thinking of the one where, some white guy kept calling her auntie.
You went to great grandma.
Oh, that's what y'all talking about, Uncle Rick. You talking about my grandmama Fanny.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
I got the answer, the grandma.
Well, as you can tell,
But that story's great.
yeah.
And her answer to, how you let that white guy call you out?
Yeah. I'll tell y'all this one, and they said one more. I won't tell all, but you can still be. They're better when you read them. Better when you read them. Again, I want to tell this story. I want to tell something that Dr. King said that we need to listen to before we close out. But so you can tell by my skin that there's a mixture of possibilities in this caramel. Sometimes this represents where black and white people came together in love. Sometimes it represents where folk came together because of lawlessness and rape. In my particular family, on my father's side, my people were partially taught Tuscarora. There's a whole lot of Tuscarora in Connecticut, by the way, but there's a great deal of them in North Carolina. And white, which was the Ames family, and black. And we come from free, what they call free issue black people in the South, in North Carolina. There were plantations around, but where my ancestors were free. And they stayed way back from the city. We recently found that they were part of the Underground Railroad. It just got.
This is up in northeastern North Carolina.
Plymouth, North Carolina, right on the river. But my people, black and white, they farmed together, they worked together. Some of my people passed, they just decided we're not taking this anymore. And they were bright-skinned enough to come to New York, come anywhere north, and they passed as white. They worked 30 years and then they go back home. I have cousins that look just like David. Especially on the Boston side. Yeah. Glasses and all, And so one day my father had gone into the Navy. And by the way, he was drafted into the Navy from Livingston State University. And when he went into the Navy, he was supposed to teach recruits. And this racist captain saw him, snatched him out of line and said, "You think you one of those arrogant N-words. And I don't care what they told you, gonna go with me and empty my deadpan, so forth and so on." He's 18, 19 years old. Later he gets transferred because of a Southern senator who was actually a segregationist, but he was good friends with the president of St. Augustine College. That's a whole other story.
Which is in Raleigh.
And and my daddy, by the way, was majoring in physics and science at that time. So he goes home on leave, and he's sitting on the porch. And this white guy who was an Ames comes up, and Grandma Fanny, who lived almost 100 years old, she was sitting on the porch, and he comes up and says, Auntie, how you been doing? And my father said, when he told me, he looked at him, he's a black man in the South, so he can't beat him, but he wants to, because Auntie was a way of not calling a black woman by her name. Auntie, Uncle Nigga, that's what is the name. Oh boy. And he's he got his Navy suit on. And when the guy finishes talking, he says, Grandma Fanny, I'm fighting it. I'm in the Navy. And the day's coming. I think it was either was right after the integration or just before the military. And he said, you want to, why you let that man call you auntie? Tell him to call you by your name. Grandma said, well, why should I do that if I'm his aunt?
Well,
And my dad said, what? He said, I've been teaching you this. This is where my father actually, because he wrote this whole history and kind of a roots book before Alice Taylor did, of our whole family did. Oh yeah, in the libraries and stuff, family charts and everything, tracing it back to the Native Americans. He did it when he was doing his graduate work up at Butler University and Christian theological seminary. But she sat him on the porch and she said, son, look, my brother married his mama, and they went up north and passed. And I was on. Oh, she said, now it was not something they talked about a lot for a lot of reasons, but that was the reality, and the reality for a lot of people like that. So, I told folks when I write this book with Jonathan, I have to own my father before he died. He said something to me that James Ford said, a professor said to him one time. He said a little different, but similar. Basically, he said, own all of who you are, or just stop trying to be human. That you got to know all of it, and all of it's not pretty. Some of it is, and some of it just is. But you need to grapple with all of who you are. And so for me, just as I walk around, and I know in the book, I said, I'm not trying to not be a black man. I'm clear about who I am, especially if the cops stop me at night in the town. I know exactly who I am today. That's clear. But I will just, if I walked around and did not look at poverty among Native Americans and poverty among white people and poverty among black people, I literally would be disowning parts of myself. And one of the guys when we were doing this at Aspen, somebody asked me the question, said, well, why is it that as a black man you choose to write about white people? I said, well, y'all been writing about us forever. I said, most of the stuff y'all wrote, a lot of it is wrong. You been writing about black people for a long time and got it wrong, a whole lot of it. You go into Stacks here in Yale, their books way back that supported slavery and justified, all the Ivy League schools, it's wrong. So don't be surprised that
They got a few new ones in there now.
They got the new ones in there. But they may be new, but folks still reading the old ones. Evidently, look at the politics of our day. Somebody's still reading the old. They ain't got the memo. Right. But my point is, when it was a strange question. Why would you write about? Right. First, I'm writing about poverty. I'm writing about all of it, but I'm honing in on this white poverty, because if we don't have this conversation, and if the politicians in our political conversations and our political action are able to isolate and separate people, it is the key to the victory of the oligarchs. Yeah. Now, what Biden and others did not settle, if I was hoping somebody would say it on King Day, I tried to say it when I did the national sermon with Bernice King and Ebenezer. In 65, and I believe this is what got Dr. King killed. I think the war and addressing poverty, but this is what got him killed. When he gave the answer to how to keep the democracy out of the hand of the Southern strategists who were funded by the oligarchs of this nation. They had said that their goal was to create intentional polarization, positive polarization, to ensure that black and whites who ought to be allies, particularly out in the South, would never vote together. That was their goal. They said in a book I called Time of Illusion that we are going to split the country. And it may create problems, may even create a Frankenstein. And we'll lie and say we didn't do it. But our number one goal is to split the country. This was the plan set in place in 65, 66, 67 with Strom Thurmond and Philip, Kevin Phillips, who later on repented and recanted on some of this stuff. But Dr. King said at the foot of the Edmonds Pettus Bridge, he did not talk just about voting rights being a black issue. In that sermon speech that went on, he lifted up the first Reconstruction, heavily in that sermon. And then he said, the greatest fear of the greedy oligarch in this country is for the mass of Negroes and the mass of poor white people to come together and form a voting bloc that could fundamentally shift and redo the economic architecture of this country. And I believe when he announced that he knew that and he was going to work on that, he had to go. He had to go.
I don't know about you, but I forgot about the condition of our country for the past hour. All about it. I know it was, but it allowed me to forget about it to some extent.
I didn't know he was in here. This book would have never happened. Bob Tanner. And Bob, give Bob a hand. I didn't even know Bob. And Bob said to me one day, because I got kind of hot, I'm saying, people ought to read it. He told me, he got called one day and said, Reverend Bob, you're going to have to deal with this. He told me something that in some ways this book may end up being prophetic. People may not get it at first. They may not get it in this election.
Yeah.
He put it to the rich.
That's right. It'd be Buttigieg called after that conference at the church.
Oh, man.
And so he told him, and then they called. And then Jonathan and I, we write in community because in community, things come out and we have experienced. I've experienced black apathy. I've experienced black conservatism that doesn't want to deal with these issues, that turns in on itself and blames itself. He's experienced and lived in Appalachia, and I'm telling business now. Work for Storm Lehrman and a whole lot of stuff that Jonathan. I hope next one we do, Jonathan and I do together. But we actually, as brothers, are the miracle that America needs. Right here.
Yes.
Right here.
Western North Carolina and northeastern North Carolina.
That's right.
It's like 400 miles apart.
That's right. That's right.
Listen, I want to make a couple of quick acknowledgements. Please allow me. I want to thank my staff at the Gilder Lehrman Center, Michelle Zacks, Melissa, Daisha, Tamara, and Daniel, who ran all the technology. Hello to all the people out there. Our new center here under which we serve, the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy, the first of our collaborations. We were also co-sponsored by Belonging at Yale and the Afro-American Cultural Center, the Student Cultural Center, and the Yale Campaign. We're all our co-sponsors. Just let me say finally, you quoted several times, but you are one of Isaiah's watchmen. Isaiah says, some people, if the prophet, end up as watchmen. Keep watch on what's happening. And then somehow find the words that tell us what is happening. So, thank you.
And you say, well, historians say that's quite a heavy compliment.
I read a lot of theology.
No, but I mean, in the context of knowing as much as he knows about who have been watchmen, and to even be, it's scary and it makes the weight, but it's a necessary weight. And I think there's so many prophetic voices that are being raised up. A lot of them are calling me about how this book has helped them. But Dave, one of the things I want to say to folks here is part of prophetic work. Nobody really ever calls themselves a prophet, but they can engage themselves in prophetic inquiry.
Other prophet never calls them.
That's why other folk do that. You never do. If somebody tells you I'm a prophet, run. But other folk can say it because they look at the work. But here's the point. Prophets always examine the problem. They pronounce the doom if the problem exists. But then they also have to have a word of hope. That what would happen if it doesn't stay the way it is. And that's the job. And sometimes the job is to say it, knowing that they may not listen, but at least they will not have the excuse that there had not been prophetic voices and words among them.
And there might be what you call a remnant.
A remnant, and that's the point. The prophet Gold, when Isaiah was told to do his work, he asked us, how many people will listen? And God said, 10%. And Isaiah said, what? And then God said, but that remnant will be enough. I want to say this to you all as you go out, people listening online. If you want to make yourself, you want to have some righteous anger, because I believe anger is grief, and grief, that you have to have a level of righteous anger against injustice, against wrong. You need both righteous anger and some hope. And why you need to be hope is when you go to work against what is. That's really what hope comes. Hope doesn't just fall on you. It's in the process. Jürgen Moltmann said, when you put your hands to the work against despair, that's where hope comes. I want you to go, and I may send it to folks here. I'm going to answer all the questions we didn't get to in writing, and you can send it out. Okay. Because of the time. But go to the battleground state, so-called battleground state, and pull up the numbers. And look at the margin of victory. And then look at the number of poor and low-wage voters. And you will find, probably, like for instance in Michigan, I don't know what it was this year, but the last election, it wasn't 10,000 votes.
Yeah.
And if there had been a focus on poor and low-wage voters with policy agenda, that's what poor and low-wage voters are looking for. They're not looking for you to tell them how much you've done. They want to know, if like when you get power, what are you going to do, say about living wage, what are you going to do? You will find that, yes, the election may not have gone the way you wanted it to. Maybe it did, I don't know. But if it didn't, the numbers that are needed are not astronomical. You talk about in some places where you got 1 million poor and low-wage folk of all colors who didn't vote. They weren't even talked to. But if they had been and had been recruited, just 10,000 of them would have changed reality. You need to see that. It'll both make you have righteous anger, but it also gives you some clarity and some hope. And you need to know that the remnant that's needed in this country to shift it is already present. It's the stone, what the scripture calls the stones that the builders have rejected. But what we have to do is raise up that has to become the cornerstone. Now the flip side of that is, if we don't, in the final analysis, have a political conversation that truly talks about what Matthew Devin called abolishing power, we can actually have that conversation. It's not hypothetical. About 7 pieces of legislation could almost abolish poverty as we know. A minimum wage of $15 an hour, it really should be 17 or 18, would lift 52 million people out of poverty. 43% of black people. If we don't have that conversation, if we don't force people like you that conversation to be had, God help us. The poor and low-wage people are the biggest possible voting expansion in this country, where you can expand the electorate. If we do it, the least of these, and our caring for the least of these, will save us. If we don't do it, God help us.